everybody. I'm Jim Werbaneth. I am a assistant professor of political science at the American Public University System in Charlestown, West Virginia. And I am also an adjunct in social studies, social sciences at the University of Arizona Global Campus. Today's topic is the Battle of Guilford Courthouse near Greensboro, North Carolina. One of the major events in the American Civil War. There were a lot of battles with a lot more people engaged, but this one was of extreme importance. Some of the background, and you do see my favorite, one of my favorite paintings of George Washington on the right. Not the old guy on the bill, but the young, vital commander of the American Revolution. Going into 1780, there was a general stalemate in the North, especially since the French had intervened, that the British had to pull a lot of troops out of North America to guard against the French in the West Indies. And also, there's always the danger of invasion of the British Isles, that the United States had no chance of reaching Britain. I mean, this is like some sort of crazy scenario, but the French, that's a whole other story. So they had to look out for more dangerous enemies than us. After the French declared war and signed their alliance with Benjamin Franklin after Saratoga, Spain also jumped in, not so much an ally of the United States, but as an ally of France. And then the British compounded it by declaring war on the Netherlands due to a lot of aid to the rebels coming out of St. Eustatius in the Caribbean. This French alliance with the Patriots shifted the balance of power dramatically. And there were no more real major offensives in the North after 1777. Even in 1778, the major battle at Monmouth was fought as the British were withdrawing to New York from Philadelphia, and Washington gave chase. As I said, there's going to be a major fight in the West Indies, a whole number of them, and the possibility of invasion. We were not as dangerous as the French. Also, Washington's army in the North was stronger and more stable than it had been previously. This was a whole other army than the one that had been chased out of New York in 1776. There was French aid coming, and also something that's going to show up at Guilford Courthouse, the influence of Friedrich von Steuben and his application of a simplified version of the Prussian drill system. We sometimes call him Frederick von Steuben. Friedrich, proper pronunciation is Steuben, and he wasn't a von, by the way. He was a commoner. He had been on the staff of Frederick the Great. Frederick the Great had a definite prejudice, though, against middle class, non-gentlemen, non-noble officers, and he was dismissed after the 7 Years' War. Also, he had the black mark on him of being very obviously homosexual. This made him unemployable in Europe, although in Prussia, I think it made him, I think this was less important than was his middle class backgrounds, because Frederick the Great was homosexual himself. And there were definitely a lot of gay men serving in the Prussian army at the time. But Steuben was unemployable in Europe. He came to the United States basically as the last place that would give him a job. And what he did, he drilled the Northern Army, he drilled the Continentals in a Prussian form of warfare, simplified, cut down from the brutal, highly precise, brutally enforced Prussian drill that he knew. And he was also handicapped by the fact he spoke almost no English. But he trained the trainers who would pass it on to the troops, so he had much greater skill, much greater cohesion among the Continentals, something that we're going to see at Guilford Courthouse especially. Now, on the other side, Sir Henry Clinton, the British commander in New York and commander for North America, and incidentally, by the way, a guy who grew up in New York City, as his father had been royal governor, Sir Henry Clinton was committed to a lower risk, less aggressive strategy based chiefly on holding New York. It was basically an enclave strategy. And Battle of Monmouth was pivotal, as I said, two ways. First of all, Clinton was retreating to New York. 22nd, Washington was giving pursuit, and the Continentals also gave as good as they got in New Jersey. You could consider it a draw under really awful conditions. It was, as the English like to say, bastard hot, probably over 100 degrees, wool uniforms, guys dropping over with heat exhaustion. The conditions were as bad as the enemy. But the Continentals didn't run. No one was blowing hunting horns at them and chasing them as they had in New York City. So this showed it was a whole other army from what it had been. And as we're going to see as well, you're seeing upgrading commanders. You have better leaders, you have better troops, better unit cohesion and training. It's all going in favor of the Patriots at this point. Here's the British Southern strategy in response to all this. And we see Sir Henry Clinton here, someone who I don't think was the best commander in North America. I think that was Lord Cornwallis, but Clinton was his boss, so he did matter. He wanted to break the general stalemate. He wanted to take the offensive and tip things in favor of in Britain's favor. He perceived that Britain was supported by a large number of loyalists, and he was given hope in this by the loyalist support in New Jersey and New York. But that he and other British commanders thought that there was a huge, called a silent majority in the South. If they could tap that manpower, if they could tap that support, they could tip the balance of power in their favor and work their way up from Georgia to South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, which at this time was the most economically prosperous, most productive, and most highly populated colony. If they could win in Virginia after securing the rest of the South, they win the Revolutionary War. They did have some strong support in the backcountry of South Carolina at 96, and also at Cross Creek, North Carolina, a town now called Fayetteville. You can tell who won. Cross Creek was populated by a lot of Highlanders from Scotland who were very pro-British. And I would consider them almost irredeemable as far as the Patriots go. Their support never wavered, at least in terms of sentiment. How many troops they put in the field? That depended. They tried first on the 27th of February, 1776 at Moore's Creek Bridge, North Carolina, near Wilmington, which, by the way, is today, it's preserved as a national battlefield. It was a pretty small battle, but the Loyalists were decisively defeated. And they never really rose up in North Carolina after this. Savannah was already in British hands from 1778. The Americans and the French tried to recover it in September and October 1779 and failed. So they already had a presence, and they were able to march into Augusta and secure what was then the main population, the main territory of Georgia. British strategy in 1780 started early. Sir Henry Clinton came south and successfully besieged Charleston, South Carolina. Here we have General Benjamin Lincoln, the American commander at Charleston. He doesn't look like much, but he was highly regarded by Washington and was sent to South Carolina and the South for what were perceived as good reasons, but he was decisively defeated. Not only did the British under Clinton capture the key city in the Carolinas, but they also destroyed the main Patriot army in the South. This siege lasted from 29 March to 12 May 1780. Patriots didn't have a chance. It was very easy to seal off the city from the sea with the Royal Navy, and also from the land in the land bridge between the Ashley and Cooper rivers. Now, as soon as Charleston fell, Clinton went back to New York and left Charles Lord Cornwallis in command of the South. His second in command, I believe, was the best commander on the British side in the Revolutionary War. So he left it with what I would call good hands. Now, in response to all this, the Continental Congress sent General Horatio Gates, the purported victor of Saratoga, take command of the Patriots in the Carolinas. Gates was not my favorite general. He's nobody's favorite general. In fact, I put up him as purported victor of Saratoga because Benedict Arnold did as much work or more than Gates did, sometimes against Gates' opposition, to win that battle. But we don't remember Arnold in a good way because of what he did later. He didn't like the color of his uniform, so he listened to his loyalist wife and defected. So Gates got all the credit. Now, Gates was defeated in disgrace at the Battle of Camden on the 16th of August. It was not an even match. Gates was a terrible commander. He relied too much on militia. Cornwallis was a very good commander, and he had some very elite British troops. He had loyalists with him, and it was off to the races, literally. Gates ran off from the battle and rode as far as Charlotte before his horse got tired. So his reputation was in tatters, destroyed. His army was destroyed. Cornwallis is off to a good start. Here's how the Americans responded to all this. First, they had very effective irregulars in guerrilla war. I know what y'all were thinking about Patriots. You're all thinking of Benjamin Martin, you're all thinking of Mel Gibson, you're all thinking of that terrible Colonel Tabington, who will meet later, actually banished to Tarleton. It's represented in the movie. It's an artistic license, but this is what most people know about the Southern Campaign. It's from the movie, so I have to acknowledge it. The Americans, the Patriots, I don't want to say Americans because there were too many loyalists who were Americans, but the Patriots engaged a very effective irregular guerrilla warfare. This wasn't just against the British. This was to intimidate their loyalist neighbors. Basically keep them out of the war. Turn them into refugees, burn their houses, and just intimidate them to sit on the fence and do nothing. These guys like Francis Marion, the model, I think, for Benjamin Martin, Thomas Sumter, a number of others that operated largely separate from the main armies, but sometimes in concert. King's Mountain was an important battle. The Scottish Major Patrick Ferguson went into the backcountry and he was defeated by the Over Mountain men. These were backwoodsmen, pioneers from western South Carolina and Tennessee who came over, utterly crushed this loyalist army. It's one of the few cases where we received large numbers of militia on both sides. And this, you want to intimidate the loyalists, wipe out their army at King's Mountain, kill the commander. And Patrick Ferguson, by the way, had his chance at Monmouth to kill George Washington. He was the inventor of a very good breech-loading rifle. And he had a beat on Washington and decided that he was too magnificent to shoot. So he passed up his chance. Now, this loyalist uprising against the Patriots was inhibited by Patriot irregular warfare, the victory at King's Mountain by the Patriots, and very bad messaging by the British. It was very mixed. First of all, Clinton issued proclamations that were intended to intimidate the Patriots. He gave them amnesty, but anyone who violated their amnesty was going to be killed on sight. It was very unforgiving. At the same time, he managed to alienate the loyalists almost as much by holding out the velvet glove of forgiveness. He told the Patriots that if they came back to the crown, if they swore allegiance and didn't take arms up again, they would get their full rights. They would be recognized as Englishmen, they would be treated well. This thoroughly angered a lot of loyalists who wanted revenge for the way they felt they had been mistreated to date. So he managed to really alienate everybody. It was politically inept. If he had done one message or the other, he might have been better off, but as it was, he decided to take the middle ground And, you know, what they say in Texas, the only things that take the middle ground are armadillos, and they get run over in the middle of the road. Now, in response to all this, there's both defeat and opportunity for the Americans, the Patriots. General Washington sends Nathaniel Greene to take the South. Yep, I went dyslexic here. The last three letters of his name are A-E-L. I have been known to do that, including on class assignments when I was a graduate student. Yeah, so yeah, my misspelling. Something about Nathaniel Greene. He's a Quaker who left the Quaker Society of Friends because he was attracted to the military. The Quakers, the Society of Friends, are very, very consistent in their pacifism. You join the Army, you take up a military life, you even show a lot of interest, especially in these days, in the military, you're going to have to leave, and he did. He's a northerner, too, from Rhode Island. He is not a southerner. Then again, neither was Benjamin Lincoln, and neither was Horatio Gates. But Greene is from a whole other cloth than those two. He's highly capable in logistics, and he rescued the situation at Valley Forge. Excuse me. The Patriot Army was sustained basically by him when everybody else screwed up. And by the way, he also intimidated a lot of the neighbors into contributing to feeding the army when they weren't willing to sell them food. He could be a little ruthless. He developed a very good strategic sense. Not always the best tactician, as we saw in the New York campaign, where he pressed to retain Forts Washington and Lee, Fort Washington and Manhattan, Fort Lee across what's today the George Washington Bridge. Excuse me. Which turned out to be a very bad move. Washington lost half the Continental Army when those two surrendered. Now, we've got a competent general coming south. There are a couple of black marks on him for the New York campaign, but he's a much better strategist. And there's a prelude, too, that I have to mention, the Battle of Cowpens, South Carolina. This was fought on the 17th of January, 1781. The Patriot commander was Daniel Morgan, we see here. He was a veteran going back to Braddock's campaign in the Monongahela near Maine, where I live now, near Pittsburgh. Sometimes termed the old Wagoneer. He was a hero of Saratoga. He led Virginia riflemen in that battle. Very good officer, very, very alienated from Great Britain on account of being ill-treated during the French and Indian War, where a British officer had him flogged. He never forgot it. And at this point, though, he has left the army. He was in ill health at this time, probably with rheumatism. He had been passed over for promotion, which he felt he deserved. Arnold felt the same way, but unlike Arnold, Morgan stayed loyal. He just went home. On the other side, we have the British and the Loyalists, commanded by Bannister Tarleton, famous, infamous character. Tarleton was known for his brutality towards patriots. He was an effective commander. He raised the British Legion that fought the South. That was primarily comprised of New Yorkers and guys from New Jersey that had come south with Clinton when he attacked Charleston. So these are northern loyalists. Tarleton was very aggressive. He was not above massacring prisoners or guys who were trying to surrender. Absolutely hated. Now, Morgan's plan was for Tarleton to attack him. He'd meet Tarleton's attack with two successive lines of militia. The idea was the militia would volley and take off. He knew they were going to take off. He knew militia had no holding power. They had definitely shown this earlier at Camden. Everybody knew that militia could not stand up to British regulars, so he didn't ask them to. Get off your couple of volleys. So Tarleton's loyalists and Britons would be attrited, worn down by the first line. Their formations would be a little ragged. They were in another line of militia, do the same thing. And then when Tarleton chased them, they would flee right into a third line of Continental Rangers. Remember Stuyvesant, Continental Rangers can stand up and fight at this point. Guess what? It worked. Tarleton's image of invulnerability, his image of being undefeated, ended. The British Legion took very heavy casualties, and Morgan basically won, and then he went home. Remember, he was very sick at this point, was not up to the rigors of combat. Here we see the map of the battle. We see the British forces here charging into a line of North Carolina and Virginia riflemen, then the North Carolina militia, and North and South Carolina militia. And notice how close the lines are together. So they were able to support each other. Tarleton then ran into a line of militia on the flanks, but Delaware and Maryland Continentals in the middle, and they were the elite of the Continental Army. And then when he was embroiled with them, his army worn down. George Washington's cousin, William Washington, and his dragoons then flanked them from the left and defeated them, chased them off. Very good point, probably the most imaginative of the American Revolution. I don't think anybody ever came close to such an innovative plan to fight the revolution. Not even Greek, as we'll see. Now, Morgan goes home. The American Army unites. The wing that had been under Morgan joins with Greene, and they have this merry chase all the way up to Virginia, up to the Dan River from South Carolina. And this is one that I keep on thinking of Helen von Moltke the Elder, a sycophantic, butt-kissing Prussian officer one said him, "Oh, you're the greatest general ever. You're just so wonderful." And Moltke spat back, "Well, I never led a retreat." Greene did. And he did it brilliantly. It wasn't a bump and run, it was just a run. And there was no pretense about it. He led Cornwallis all the way from central South Carolina up to southern Virginia. And he did it with pride, he did it very well. He collected boats on rivers before he could get there. He would be able to cross, he'd take the boats away, there's Cornwallis stuck on the other side running around looking for boats. Because remember, very few bridges, the rivers might be shallow, but they can also be pretty wide in North Carolina especially. The part that I know the best. Also, too, this is very important. Remember, Greene understood supply. He understood logistics. He's running towards his supply sources in Virginia, the most productive colony, the one that was feeding his army. He doesn't have to, the further he runs, the less he has to worry about supply, because he's getting closer to it. Now, the British pursued as best as they could. This is a conventional European army with a baggage train, conventional forces. They're trying to chase after Greene, and even in the winter in North Carolina, it's mild, but it's still hard to find food. So his army is logistically handicapped compared to Greene. Now, Cornwallis took a gamble here, he calculated risk. He saw they couldn't catch Greene impeded by the supply wagon, so he burned them. And showing what kind of leader Cornwallis was, the first wagon he burned was his own, with all of his personal stuff in it. So he can make this grand gesture that he's going to share in some of the misfortunes and hardships of his troops by burning his own personal goods, which he does. But by burning his wagons, he aggravates the supply problem. This cements the logistical superiority that the Patriots had over the Brits. Now, sooner or later, Greene knows he has to make a stand at Guilford Courthouse, or somewhere. But he has already scouted the territory of Guilford Courthouse. He knows what the land is. It's a little bit of a precursor, if you want, of Wellington looking out at the field at Waterloo saying, hey, this is where I will make my stand. But Greene has already scouted out the area around Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina, north of what's today Greensburg. It's in the interior of the state. This is important because Cornwallis is increasingly dependent on the Royal Navy and seaport supplies. He's pretty far from the coast here, especially from South Carolina, his main supply base, Charleston, South Carolina. Also, it's not one of these areas with a lot of big plantations with a lot of slaves and growing tobacco. Now, these are food farms. And this area is heavily populated by the Society of Friends. Came down from the north, followed the Great Valley through the Shenandoah into North Carolina for the opportunity. They're farmers, they're smaller farmers. Also, too, something to remember about the Society of Friends, not only are they pacifists, they're also abolitionists for the most part. And as time goes on, they become more and more anti-slavery. So this is not some sort of stereotypical southern area. Free labor, productive farms, Quakers, the same religion that Greene had been a part of. Also, too, this battlefield is going to be much, much more wooded than Cowpens. If you visit the battlefield today, you can see a lot of the trees have actually grown in more than from the days of the battle. And it remains very heavily wooded, surrounded by housing developments, but this is a very wooded battlefield. You don't have the long lines of sight that you might have other places. You don't have the room for bayonet charges that the British might favor. It's also going to impede command and control. But Greene specifically picks this battlefield, and Cornwallis attacks. There's more chance for confusion here too. Command and control can break down, confusion can set in, and I'm not sure that Cornwallis really considered this. Greene did. Now, he's also determined to follow a plan very similar to Morgan's at Cowpens. He learned from Morgan. He's willing to learn. And yes, there will be a map later, so don't worry. And he's going to have these three lines. He's going to have the weakest militia out front. These are the guys from North Carolina. They're the ones who are defending their homes, but also have the worst potential staying power. Behind them is a firmer line of more skilled, more determined Virginians, again, militia. Now, the third line is Maryland and Delaware Continentals. Most of these Continental soldiers are very good. Second Maryland is a little weaker because it's a raw unit. They have not been blooded yet. And as we'll see coming up, they're a little bit of a weak link, but they're back here with more experienced, better troops. The battle begins. Here we see Banastre Tarleton, not my favorite figure in the Revolution. I love the Patriot, by the way, and I think that Jason Isaacs did a real good job portraying him under the name Colonel Tabington. One of those villains you just absolutely love to hate. And he's supposed to be in the reserves behind the main British line, but he gets pushed out into the vanguard. His troops and all the other British were already tired, they were hungry when they made contact at 10 o'clock in the morning. Tarleton, as I said, led what might have been the British Reserve, or much of it. So Cornwallis already had to renew his reserves in order to put Tarleton up front. This is a mixed force of guards, light infantry, the elite of the British Army, German Jaegers, who were rifle-armed marksmen, and Tarleton's own British Legion cavalry, which had been suffered heavy casualties at Cowpens. But Tarleton is out for blood. He wants revenge. And there's a running fight between him and and Henry Lee, Light Horse Harry, the father of Robert England, coming up the New Garden Road towards Guilford Courthouse in the morning. Sometimes considered a separate battle. I consider it more of a skirmish before Guilford Courthouse. But Tarleton is already in the vanguard. He's already in front, out of the reserves, before the battle starts. And he's also wounded, by the way. He's shot in the right hand. He loses 2 fingers. He basically wraps them up and keeps on going. And interestingly, after the Revolution, he went home to Liverpool, became a massive gambler, and he played cards with a hand missing fingers, which I'm sure was a handicap in that new chosen profession. But he's wounded at Guilford Courthouse, shakes up a mangled hand instead of running to the rear, and continues the battle. Now, he and the vanguard run into that first line of North Carolina militia. They were supposed to fire 2 volleys and retreat. They were delaying the disruption force. That's the plan. Both sides volleyed at least once. Then the militia took off. Some of them took off faster than the others. The British suffered significant casualties. Now, there's a little bit of confusion how many they lost at each part of the battle. It's the 18th century anyhow, but their cohesion remained intact. They were not broken up by the first line of militia. Now here we have General Charles O'Hara, the commander of the guards. On the left, the 33rd Foot was flanked by Virginia riflemen. This drew them away off to the left, the British left. The 33rd Foot, by the way, was Cornwallis's own regiment. This was a very good unit that he had trained before the war. All of them were trained as light infantry. They could fight in the line, but they could also fight as light infantry. So this is a very good unit that is drawn away from the main effort. On the right, the 1st Guards and the von Bosa regiment of Germans went after Light Horse Harry's dragoons. They go tearing off to the south on the right, chasing him into the woods, and increasingly they're detached from the battle. So you have the British Army separating in the flanks. And at this point, too, there's a split in the center as they're drawn apart. What does Cornwallis do? He's compelled to commit more units from his reserves, the 2nd Guards and the Guards Grenadiers to shore up the center. At this point, he has no reserves. If he wins the battle, he has no one to commit for a pursuit. He has no one to drop in to turn the battle into a decisive moment. His whole army is committed. Now, this reduced the chances of a decisive victory, at least a worthwhile victory, in what, by all rights, should have been a walkover. It's not. Just the actions of the 2 lines of militia to split the British Army and make him commit his last reserves to the center before he even reaches the Continentals. To a large extent, this wins it for the Patriots. If you could say they won it. Officially, Cornwallis won the battle, but it was a Pyrrhic victory in the end. This is where this is assured that he will not get that worthwhile victory over Britain. Now, the 2nd line of Virginians, they're positioned in thick woods. There are 2 brigades. Robert Lawson's brigade supposedly fought as badly as the North Carolinians, possibly because they were flanked. Now, Stevens' brigade fought more stubbornly and neutralized 2 regiments, or 1 regiment, as an offensive force. This was the 71st Foot of Scottish Highlanders. Stevens retreated in good order. His troops did not take off and run for the high grass the way that Lawson's Virginians and the North Carolina militia did. So half of the 2nd line fights according to plan. The other half, maybe they had a reason, maybe they didn't. They didn't meet even the low standards that Greene set. Now, at this point, Cornwallis penetrates the 2nd line, he drives them off, and he collides into the 3rd line. James Webster's brigade advances, but it's shattered by Patriot volleys at 30 to 40 yards. Webster is mortally wounded. That's one brigade that is seriously hurt when it hits the third one. The 33rd Foot makes a charge that's repulsed. It fell back to high ground where it stood effectively. It did not fall apart. And it was able to withstand any rebel counterattacks. The second Guards ran into the second Maryland. Guards being the best troops in the British Army, they run into the second Maryland, the worst Continentals of this army because, well, they're new, they're raw, they're relatively inexperienced and untrained. They're routed, and they lose 2 guns and 2 artillery pieces in the process. The Dragoons under William Washington and horse soldiers from North Carolina and Virginia then counterattack the Guards. The 1st Maryland Continentals flanked the Guards who got too enthusiastic and threw them into confusion. So this is a really messed up, confused battle at this point. Guys coming in, guys running out, reinforcements coming in, people getting flanked. It's a mess. This turns into a confused melee which drifts westward towards the British rear. And what happens next is really kind of controversial. I believe that most historians and analysts have accepted a myth at this point. Did Cornwallis order his artillery to fire into this melee regardless of casualties to his troops? Nathaniel Greene said he did, telling the Guards commander Charles O'Hara that it was a necessary evil. Obviously, Greene was in no position to overhear this conversation. Cornwallis and O'Hara never mention it, and Cornwallis does not talk about it to the commander in South Carolina, or Francis Rodham. Also, O'Hara was wounded twice. He might have even been captured briefly, and he was unable to confer with anybody. He was too busy trying to stay alive. So I don't think this happened. I don't think that Cornwallis deliberately fired artillery grape shot into troops and killed his own soldiers trying to win the battle. Here we have a map. I promised y'all a map. And it's pretty straightforward. But what we can see here, in contrast to Elkins, is that the militia lines are further apart. They're not supporting distance, that Cornwallis is assured of hitting them in series, not basically all at once. Some historians have said that this was a mistake on Greene's part. Maybe it was. At the same time, he still managed to hold his own. And most of the militia, at least half of it, did what they were supposed to. And the British did run into that melee, that total mess when they reached the Continentals back by the courthouse. So I can't really gainsay Greene that much. His plan did not work quite as well as Morgan's, but it was getting there. So we get to the end of the battle. The British officially won. The Americans retreated in good order. Greene left the battlefield to Cornwallis, so Cornwallis stood right back and say, I won. But Greene had the foresight to designate a rally point at Speedwell Ironworks, 13 miles to the rear. There's no running off to Charlotte the way that Gates did. He's going to reassemble his army and be able to fight another day. Now, according to 2 of the major scholars of the battle, Lawrence Babbitt and Joshua B. Howard, the British lost 93 killed, 413 wounded, and 26 missing, out of a force of 1,900 to 2,200 men. They lost between 20 and 25% of the troops. And most of these were concentrated among the elites, the 33rd Foot and the Guards. The same writers give the Americans losses at 79 killed, 184 wounded, 1,046 missing, out of 4,000 to 4,400 engaged. When you look at the missing, a lot of this is going to be militia. They did not die in the battlefield. They did what they were supposed to, and they ran. But big militia and being marched, they were going to go back and plant their crops. So there are casualties, and then there are casualties. The British definitely took it worse here, and they could not replace these elite troops as easily as the Americans could retreat militia. Some of the conclusions: despite winning the battle, Cornwallis retreated to Wilmington to regroup and resupply. His troops, by the way, went 2 days without food after Guilford because of the supply situation. He had to get back to the sea. He had to get back to resupply, get replacements, let the wounded recover, and this included Charles O'Hara, who's very important. And he also left a lot of the wounded behind, as did Greene, in order to let the Quakers take care of it. Quakers weren't real happy because they did not support military activities, and taking care of the wounded was a military activity. Now, Greene pursued. He went south, and he skirted past Cornwallis to engage Rawdon in South Carolina. Cornwallis's next move: invade Virginia. Plan was to meet up with Arnold, other troops in Virginia, take Virginia out as a Patriot supply source and center of support. Also, too, one of the consequences is that there was a strained relationship between Clinton and Cornwallis, and also the Lord George Germain, the colonial secretary, who was running the war from London. They were all at cross purposes. Clinton wanted the enclave strategy of defending forts. Cornwallis was more aggressive. Germain didn't know what he was doing. Germain, by the way, never should have been in charge of anything. Even more than Steuben, he had a very bad reputation as a homosexual, which was not accepted in the 18th century, as we saw earlier with Steuben. Also, after the Battle of Minden in the 7 Years' War, he had refused to commit the British cavalry to support the Duke of Brunswick, Ferdinand, against the French. Duke Ferdinand had him court-martialed for disobedience and cowardice. So here you have a convicted coward running a war. Yeah, good choice, guys. Now, the invasion of Virginia leads to Yorktown. Not a good look for the British. In fact, when they surrendered there, the song they played was called "The World Turned Upside Down." Here we have the surrender at Yorktown. The white flag, all joking aside, is the flag of the Bourbon dynasty in France. You have the French over here with the white uniforms. You have Washington and the Patriots over here. Washington did not accept the surrender of the British. Cornwallis was sick, he stayed home. So he sent out O'Hara. Here we have the British surrendering. By this point, Benjamin Lincoln had been exchanged. He's the guy on the horse. Washington let him have his payback by accepting Cornwallis and Tarleton's surrender at Yorktown. Now, I was told that I should recommend a war game. This was an easy choice. I actually developed one on Guilford. It was Richard Burke's game in Carolina Rebels Flintlock, and that didn't go over so well. I know the publisher eventually had a Viking funeral for it. I did my best. There was also one in a Revolutionary War battle pack that Precision Games put out. So the best game on Guilford is called Guilford from GMT. I love this system. It's my runaway favorite. It also has a bonus battle with Utah Springs where Greene took on Rawdon in South Carolina. And the funny thing is, though, about Greene, he never won a battle officially. I think he won Guilford Courthouse. Just because he didn't have the battlefield didn't mean he won. He didn't win. But he officially lost that one. His troops got a little too crazy looting the British at Utah Springs, but he never officially won a battle. But he was one of the best strategists of the war, self-taught, and this is, I believe, Guilford was his crowning achievement. There are a lot of books on this, a lot of primary sources. Everybody in his dog wrote memoirs. Cornwallis published his letters, and they were published in 1859. Greene wrote his memoirs of life and campaign. Henry Lee wrote his. There is some really good current scholarship. Stanley D. and Parpenter, Southern Gambit. This was recommended to me by the staff at the Guilford Courthouse battlefield. And they were, this is modern scholarship by a professional historian writing for the military, who writes about the unwinnability of the Southern campaign from a British perspective. Also, fun fact, his ancestors were on the losing side. They were loyalists. And he named some of them, but he has a loyalist background in the Middle South. Babbitt's and Howard at the top, long, obstinate, and bloody. The battle of Guilford Courthouse. I think that's one of the definitive histories of the battle itself. Richard Middleton's Cornwallis, Soldier and Statesman in a Revolutionary World at the top is very good, but it concentrates less on the Revolution and more on Cornwallis's role as Mr. Fix-It for the Empire. First in India, then Ireland, then back to India, where he eventually died as he was the governor of the presidency of Bengal. But there are a lot of good books on this. A lot of primary sources and one very, very good game. So,